Join us this new year for new conversations at the Commonwealth Club.
Hello and welcome to our January 19th Week to Week. This, by the way, completes our 11th year as the Commonwealth Club's political roundtable, so we're very pleased with that. I'm John Zipperer, your host for Week to Week. I'm also a former Goldman Sachs and Citigroup employee, a graduate of Baruch College, and the former head of Friends of Pets United. So very glad you could be here with us. It's great to see you. Obviously, today we're going to be talking about some stuff that's happening in the political world today, as well as taking a bit of a look at things we can expect in the rest of 2023. So let's meet our panelists today, starting on the far end of the stage with Tim Anaya. He's the Communications Director for the Pacific Research Institute. He's also a former Assembly GOP and California Legislature staffer. So welcome back, Tim.
Thank you.
Melissa Cain is the host of the new Get Out the Bet podcast, and is also a political analyst and journalist. Hello again, Melissa. And next to me is Bob Butler, a KCBS radio reporter. He's also the broadcast vice president for SAG-AFTRA. Welcome. So our first topic, you might have even heard about this a little bit. There's been a lot of power changing hands in Washington, D.C. over the past couple months. Let's focus on the U.S. House of Representatives, which was won by the Republicans in the fall election. The GOP holds the chamber with a slim margin of 4 votes, and that narrow majority came into play in glorious technicolor during the recent selection of the Speaker at the House, which, of course, was finally won by California Representative Kevin McCarthy. Melissa, I want to start with you. Much was made about the Wagnerian opera of the selection process that we all witnessed. But what about the substance? I mean, like, what was happening? What was the meaning of these, very tense battles we were seeing within the Republican Party?
Oh boy, kill the wagon. Here's the thing. The things that the Republicans, the holdout Republicans were fighting about are actually, if you look at the list of things, the items that they wanted, some of them folks on the left would object to, some of them, you can debate, but there were certain things that they were trying to do to kind of unclench the party fist in the House. And you have even people like AOC coming out saying, you know what, these aren't all terrible. Like, this is actually a good thing that we're going to be able to vote on more things. We're going to be able to debate more things, because the way it kind of works now is whoever's in power goes into a room and comes up with a bill, and it's like 75,000 pages long, and it's got everything in the world in it, and then they just immediately bring it out to the floor, vote on it, and that's it. And so in a way, I mean, there are some of the things that they were trying to do that I think we can all hold hands and agree are probably okay. It would probably be okay to vote on things more and to debate more and to have bills that aren't, huge books that are only, to sort of get put on the floor and you vote right away. There's a 72-hour rule as part of the thing. So that's part of it. There's also, they want to go after Hunter Biden, and there are the other kind of more partisan things in there. But there are certain parts of this that actually, it's hard to make the case against. They're really, if you are like me, not a fan of political parties, I was like, okay, great. Let's not like the drama of it, but I wasn't mad at some of the things that they were asking for, even though I'm not a Republican.
Interesting. Tim, what were your thoughts watching this?
Well, I think one of the interesting things is we kind of we're used to the Speaker being this kind of all-powerful person in Washington. And, historically, the Speaker was very powerful. They controlled all the money that was doled out to candidates, and they certainly controlled all the committee assignments and perks and what kind of office you got and what kind of great congressional delegation trips that you got to go on. And I think this whole debate really shows us that that's really a relic of the past. Now that kind of internet grassroots fundraising is such a big thing right now. You know, someone like a Matt Gaetz or an AOC, they're not dependent on the party leadership anymore. So when they come to them and say, you better vote for this or else, or you better vote for me or else, they can tell them to pound sand because they've got their own $20 million in the bank, and they have a whole network of people across the country who are following what they're doing and are sending in their $5 and $10. So I think that kind of drama really was, you know, on full display for us to see really for the first time of how different things are in Washington today.
Like literally, the congressman get like his face. You know, the security guy came and kind of grabbed him by the
Oh,
face.
yes.
That was amazing C-SPAN content,
Yeah.
like, which people should watch more of, I think. But it was. I remember watching it and being like, "What is happening right now?" People are walking up the aisle and like yelling at each other. It was. My British friends were like, "Thanks, America," because we felt like we were a little sheepish after our whole prime minister thing there for a minute. But you have successfully taken the attention away from us and put it on your system.
Right.
Yeah, C-SPAN. Yeah. That may be one of the next bills to ban C-SPAN from the freeways.
Be more C-SPAN.
But
Cameras
they
everywhere.
really showed their value, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Bob, what were your thoughts when you were watching this unfold?
I was sitting here thinking, you know, the country is in a position where you want legislators who are going to legislate for the people. And I just don't feel comfortable that the Republican Party really cares about legislating for the people. I mean, who in their right mind would propose getting rid of Social Security or changing it to the point where anybody who's getting it would lose out? I mean, that to me is a loser for their constituents. I can't wait for the debate on getting rid of the IRS in favor of a 30% sales tax. You know.
Well, here's the thing, though. When you've got a split between the House and the Senate, like we do now, where you have the House controlled by one party and the Senate controlled by the other, you get a lot of signaling legislation. And the Democrats do this too when Republicans are in charge of the Senate. You constantly will get emails saying, we passed a bill giving a free puppy to every American, and it died in the Senate. And you go, you never thought that was going to actually take place.
John Lewis
You
Voting
just
Rights
want to be
Act
able
and
to
all that,
send
yeah.
that email asking me for money, telling me you did the thing. And so now that it's flipped, and now that the Democrats are in charge of the Senate and Republicans in the House, there's going to be a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of bills that are passed in the House that are, you might think are totally bananas, but it's just so they can go back and tell their constituents, I voted for that bill, even though they know it would never actually happen, right? It's the dog and the car, right? You know what I mean? So we'll see, we'll probably see a lot of that. And so there's a lot of people making representations, but it's really a lot of just, fundraising and no one really thinks necessarily they're going to be signed into law.
And I can speak to that too. Having worked in the California legislature for nearly 20 years, there are bills that you have in your package every year that are district bills to solve problems that your constituents have come forward with. And then there are bills, we would call them messaging bills, where there's an issue like tax reform or like Social Security reform where you're not going to pass it. You may not even bring it up for a vote in some cases, but you want to start a conversation. Sometimes, a lot of legislation, it doesn't pass in the first year or even in the first session. Sometimes it takes 5 or 10 years to get the ball moving and build a coalition around that issue. So, some of these ideas that sound, there's no way any of those bills are ever going to be passed by both houses, but those people pushing them, they want to start a conversation on those issues.
And they want to play the blame game. We have this great idea, and the Democrats killed it.
Yep.
The Democrats hate America. They killed this. They killed the bill to abolish the IRS and get rid of your Social Security, and raise your sales tax 30%. I mean, but it's bonkers. But that's the performances we're going to see in the next couple of years.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk and kind of bewilderment about, okay, McCarthy had to make a lot of concessions, and everyone has to make concessions when they're doing that negotiation to be speaker, more so when you've got a really narrow majority. Pelosi did it, Boehner did it. Tim, you worked with McCarthy when you were in the state legislature. Can you tell us what you think of him? How does he operate, and what can we expect him to operate in what's probably going to be a very contentious year on many fronts?
Right. Well, I would say one thing on that kind of issue of the the trade-offs and how to do it. We certainly all saw, thanks to C-SPAN, some of the wild things that people were talking about and were saying during that week. Well, if you think that's wild, go behind closed doors when they're off the record and hear the things that they're talking about and asking for. And you as the leader, and again, both, Nancy Pelosi had to do this too, any party leader has to do this, you have to, with a straight face, take these things seriously and cut a deal and get enough people in moving forward. It's been said that if you're a party leader, more so if you're a minority leader, but I think it applies if you're the speaker, it's like trying to herd feral cats. And we saw that all on display here. Now, Kevin, as kind of what he'll be like, I worked for him for 3 years when he was Republican leader in Sacramento. I would say, I think we could expect two things. One, he's a very political person. And by that, I don't mean he's going to be, this, that, or the other in his press conferences lobbing charges. Yes, there'll be those times. But in terms of he's a political animal, he knows every district, who the congressman is, who are the key players in their district, who are the up-and-coming people to recruit. Last year for the House, he raised over $500 million to elect Republican candidates to the House. So this is someone who literally, even though we have this kind of new era of grassroots fundraising, a lot of people up there owe Kevin their job. So I think he'll be, for his longevity, that will help him, that he'll be attuned to how do we keep the seats we have and how do we move forward. Now, the knock you'll get on Kevin is, well, he's not a policy guy. He's not really interested in policy. And that might have been true earlier in his career. The times I have seen him more lately, he is really deep on policy. And certainly if you see him in an interview now, all he's talking about, really are policy issues. But I think that's a thing of leadership. When you look at issues in Washington, the president's agenda is always the Biden agenda. But the congressional agenda, well, it's really not the McCarthy agenda or the Hakeem Jeffries agenda. It's really the party's agenda. And if you're a good leader, yes, you're out in front, but you empower your membership to be the ones who are carrying those bills and being the front people for their top priorities. So though Kevin may not be the one saying, this is my plan and here are all the things I want to do, it's actually smart on his part to be one, yes, I'm there and yes, I'm supporting my team, but you're really putting the key members up front, having that front and center moment in the spotlight. So I think you'll see a lot of that. Well, member management, as we would call it, is really the key function of a speaker, aside from their, kind of policy duties. And I think he'll do quite well at that, despite this kind of wild environment he finds himself in.
One of the things that Nancy Pelosi was very good at was giving cover for her members, who, protecting moderate members who might have the more progressive members mad at them on abortion or gun control or something like that because they're from more purple districts. How do you think McCarthy will do on that? Will he?
He will get that.
Yeah.
That will be his inclination, but that's one of the consequences of the rules changes, that the rebels wanted to see. Because when you have more votes on amendments on the floor and more debate, one of the consequences of that, if you're a party leader, is members in tough races are going to have to take votes they don't want to take. So you're going to see that those in competitive districts or who could be at risk of losing their seats in the next election, they're going to have to take those votes.
Melissa, you interviewed John Boehner here for the club, and he was a speaker who famously got frustrated dealing with his hard right, I guess the Tea
Which
Party
is now
at the
the
time.
mainstream.
Right, well, yeah, right. Just like Reaganites used to be considered very, Democrats thought they were extremists, and then Reaganites were the ones who were like driven out of the party by the Trumpists. But
The revolutions always eat their own.
yes,
Yes.
but tell us kind of what he went through and his approach and why he left.
Well, I can tell you, John Boehner, no one's like happier right now than John Boehner. He's on the golf course laughing. He wrote this book called On the House. It was a great book. And he was such a great interview because he was no longer speaker, you could talk about it. And he called them the Hell No Caucus. And he said the problem with them is that they know, like, the crazier they are, the more, it's sort of like in sports, how everyone wants like the Sports Center clip. You know, you want like the big hits. You're not doing the fundamentals. Sometimes your people, I don't know. I clearly don't know what I'm talking about, but you know what I mean? Like people who like sports will tell you that. But it's like that, where people, they just want like that highlight clip. And so they care more about that than they do sort of the mundanities of performing, government work. And so he said his thing was, because again, it's called On the House, but it's also about his childhood when he grew up. His dad owned a bar, and so he grew up in the bar. But he basically said, look, I grew up in a bar. I'm used to dealing with crazy people. He's like, you deal with it. And he literally said crazy. He's like, crazy people come in, it's fine. He's like, but you do your best. And he had raised money for them. Because I asked him, I was like, but you raise money for them, and then they show up, and then they say all these things about you. And he's like, yeah. So it doesn't mean necessarily that they're gonna, dance with the one that brung them. That might not, if you're angling for something else, right? If re-election isn't your goal, if being a pundit is your goal, or some other kind of thing is your goal, that's not necessarily going to be sort of a tie that's going to hold you to that. But he said that it was very difficult, and that you really couldn't compete with these other pressures or other pulls that were pulling your party members into a different place. You just kind of do your best and find that sort of Venn diagram. I think McCarthy might do something like let his caucus do whatever crazy stuff they want to do so they can go back and say they did it. But then when it comes to, in exchange, when it comes to the important stuff, we expect you to line up. And I don't know how that's going to go, but that might be the plan,
Right.
The plan might be, we'll let them do their thing, and then, in exchange, they will, raise the debt ceiling or whatever it is that we need them to do when we need them to do it. Fingers crossed.
There's a quote that's attributed to Sam Rayburn. Son, if you can't take their money, drink their whiskey, and then vote against them, you don't deserve to be here. That's actually the PG version. There's another version of that quote that I'd have to go to HR. But there was some talk during this whole kind of, as the country was watching this happen, as to whether he should basically make these concessions, get elected speaker, and then just basically ignore the crazy claims or demands from some of the folks in his caucus.
I think that's what's going to happen. I mean, he's made a lot of concessions. I mean, allowing one member to get up and call for his head. I mean, that's fine, but you have to have enough people vote for it. So I don't know that that's actually going to happen, but I think he wanted to be speaker. He said, I'll do anything to be speaker. And then once I get there, all bets are off. I'll do what I want to do. And I think that's what's going to happen.
And I would say on the, kind of the one member issue, if, we don't know how things are going to take us, but if, we get to that point, you still need 218 votes on the floor to do it.
That's what I'm saying.
And so if you're Hakeem Jeffries, it's in your interest to have kind of disarray, but is it in your interest to topple him as speaker and have someone else? You can work with Kevin.
Right.
Can you work with person
Jim Jordan.
X, Y, or Z?
Jim Jordan, yeah.
So only, do I have this right? Only Republican members could move to vacate. Or,
No, anybody.
Anyone?
Anybody.
Democrats?
Anybody
could
can.
do it? Okay.
I'm actually surprised during this whole thing that Jeffrey didn't go to him and say, look, let's reach a power sharing agreement. You're the speaker, but I've got 6 people that'll vote for you to get this taken care of. I'm surprised it didn't happen.
At least what they were saying through the news was that the Democrats had all agreed not to do that. But yeah, there was another line of thinking that was like, well,
But then
is
there's
this going to be the result or the resolution of
There's
this?
always the back room.
Right. Yeah. Well, speaking of saner minds in Congress, let's dive into the saga of George Santos, if that's his real name. Yeah. I'll stick with you, Bob. I mean, the MSNBC talking heads and the political tweeters are, of course, very engaged in the Santos story. Is this likely to be anything that gets down beyond kind of the entertainment level of the political world, or or does it become one of those millstones around the neck that the Republicans nationally kind of have to always hang their heads out?
Well, I don't think the Republican Party cares that he lied. I mean, because I think that's kind of de rigueur for the party nowadays. It doesn't matter what you do as long as you win. So I don't think George Santos has anything to worry about, or what is his name?
DeVolder,
George Anthony.
and what's his drag name?
Somebody must.
Curology or
Yeah, whatever. I mean, I don't think he has anything to worry about until re-election. I think come re-election, I think even a lot of the people who voted for him now are saying, if I'd have known all this, I never would have voted for the guy. So I think he may have a problem then. But the party itself, I don't think the party really cares because, he's another vote.
Especially with a 218
Yep.
majority.
But I'm wondering whether or not, I mean, we've got all these people that ask for pardons and stuff. You just wonder if the DOJ is going to one day come up and say, issue some indictments to these people that, basically tried to help Trump overturn the election. I don't know. But if that happens, and if they're from Democratic states, that could flip very quickly, the House.
Melissa?
So every day is just like, you pick up the phone, you look at the news, and you're like, oh, killed a dog. Well, of course. One of these days, it's going to be like Vladimir Putin. I want to know, where was his opponent? Because, look, there's a lot of reasons why I don't run for office, but one of them is I'm just convinced that my opponent would be out there talking to my first grade teacher about how I used to eat paste, and I don't need the world to know that.
You too?
But you know what I mean? Like, I think a lot of us believe that there is some, usually the opponent, but somebody's doing some betting out there. And so that's part of why this is so baffling. It's just like, that's who I want to talk to. No more from George Santos.
Well, his opponent, apparently a lot of criticism has been aimed at the head of the Democratic Party in New York State because they had this information. It was out, or they had some of the information out. And frankly, if you can't take a small kernel of information of bad news for your opponent and make it into a big thing, you don't deserve to be in politics. not in the big leagues, okay? And I mean, it failed to do that, clearly. I mean, it was...
But there's a few ways to kind of deal with this. And now people are mad that he got seated. But the truth is there's sort of two things. One is like exclusion from the House, and the other is expulsion, right? So to exclude someone and say you can't even take your seat, you have to sort of fail the three tests: the citizen for 7 years and a resident of your state, and be a certain age. And so if you were those things, they kind of have to seat you. There's really no other way to prevent someone. But once you're in, to kick you out, then that's a 2/3 vote, and that's something that they can do. And I think they're doing committee. They're investigating now, but just because people, I think that there's, the cops should come. But the truth is, there's very little that you can do once somebody's already in. If they've met those requirements and they've been elected, the place to look is when you go to sign your statement, your candidate statement, whether or not he attested to certain things under penalty of perjury that weren't true. And if that's the case, then the DA or Secretary of State in New York, I know in California that would be, I think, a Secretary of State, but the Attorney General could come after you. So those are the only real avenues that you have, aside from, as you point out, re-election, which 2 years it can seem like a long time, but it's not that long when it comes to being in Washington, and as soon as the dust settles, you're already running for re-election. So hopefully this short national nightmare will be over soon.
You mentioned investigation. Didn't they go to the ethics committee, the one that Kevin's going to disband?
Is he disbanding the ethics committee? I think he's putting together something to...
It's not going to be very ethically sound.
Maybe Matt Gaetz will chair it. Tim, Democrats probably don't want him out of office for the next 2 years.
That's right. You want him front and center every day. And you want the albatross for the next election. Everybody who took money from him or gave him money or sat next to him on the floor or voted with him or seen anywhere with him, that's gold, really. But I think you're right. This is a question that's going to be solved. Obviously he has no shame, so he's not going to step down. Congress doesn't exactly have a great track record over the years, including recent times, of investigating their own. So I wouldn't put much faith in that. And, it's going to be whether on his campaign reports that he said something fraudulent or had questions about what his spending was, or, that's the way to go. But, the whole thing for me, what I think we may have found is, I don't know about you all, but I saw last year one of the shows I binged on Netflix was Inventing Anna. And Inventing Anna is a whole story like this, but in the art world. We may have found the second season of Inventing Anna.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next topic, and all you Democrats who have been laughing at the Republicans. So there are these Biden files that apparently are everywhere. I mean, we've taped a secret document to the bottom of every chair here in the audience.
You get
Take
a
it home
secret.
with you.
Yeah.
Yes, you've got one. You've got top secret. The special prosecutor will call you presently. But, for days, it seemed like every day there was another, they found some more secret documents in his home, in his garage, and whatever. Republicans, of course, were quick to point out Democrats' outrage over former President Donald Trump's taking of classified documents and charged hypocrisy. First, are there any significant differences between the situations of Biden and Trump and their respective hordes of secret documents?
Any differences?
Sure. Bob, you go first.
Well, I think it shows that people can be careless. What I wonder is how many other people, after leaving office or whatever, found they had documents, called the archives, and turned them back in, as opposed to not turning them back in and fighting and saying that they're theirs. In Biden's case, they're saying it was probably his staff that mixed the documents up and took them, and then when the lawyers found them, they called the archives, turned them back in. That's a good thing. You found out that you walked out of the grocery store with an extra, bottle of hand wash, and you go back in and you pay for it. That's what happened. It's different than stealing the whole, getting the trash bag and throwing stuff in and walking out and daring somebody to stop you. But is it a problem? Yeah, it's a problem. Because nobody should be having documents that they shouldn't have, especially I don't know if they're top secret, whatever they are. But I found it interesting that I was reading this yesterday that the Biden White House was told by the DOJ not to talk about it. Don't look for the documents. Don't look for any more documents.
Really?
Let us handle it. Yeah. But this happened early on, right after the election, when they found the documents, I think, on November 8th, and they called the DOJ. They called the archives. The DOJ said, "Keep this quiet. Let's not talk about it." So people are accusing the administration of a cover-up when they were basically being told they were doing what they were told by DOJ. So that's what I'm hearing. It's still a problem.
Melissa?
I mean, there's this, if you're explaining, you're losing in politics. And there's just a lot of explaining going on right now from the White House when it comes to these documents. And I think most people agree that, somebody should take a look here. And if something was done wrong, we should fix it. I think it's so early. We don't really know what those documents were. We don't know how many different places there were. And people are... It just seems his administration has seemed pretty tight-lipped on certain issues, and I think this is just the frustration with the communication around the documents. If this was the only subject upon which that seemed like a fortress, then I think people might not be as up in arms. But there just seems to be a lot of waving away of there's no border problem, there's no Hunter Biden laptop problem, there's no document problem, and people are, I think, starting to get increasingly concerned that this administration isn't responding to questions about certain things. And so I think that it just feeds into, I think at the very least, you had to wake up and read that and go, not helping,
That's exactly how I thought of it, because when I, thought about this story, I thought of it from having been that press staffer back in the day who had to clean up messes sometimes for politicians. And you have, the very definitive statements on TV from the president and the surrogates of, that is so reckless, I can't imagine anybody would do that. Now it's your job to walk that back. Mm-hmm. And that's very hard to do. And yes, when you're explaining, you're losing, but boy, I feel for them because they've been in a rough patch. And then the bit about the garage and all of that. That didn't help things either, to say the least. So, there's the legal thing, and I think they've done that pretty well, right? The Attorney General did the special counsel. That's good. Theoretically, that kind of takes it out of politics, and nothing is really ever out of politics, but that's good. You want it to be at a 30,000-foot view. At the end of the day, we all want to say, everybody who's been accused of these things, it's been a similar process. So if they can say that, they're going to be good on the legal front. But on the politics front, oh, what a mess. And the more you're talking, really, the more you're digging. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the right, and the point about having them keep quiet, that is the correct thing to do. If Melissa was my lawyer, she would tell me, don't say anything until the trial is over or until, there's a resolution of whether they're charged. Because whatever you say, that's part of the record. Yeah. So that's easier said than done when you're a president or a politician, because that's your first instinct. I got to explain, and I've got to get out of this. So it's a real conundrum on the political and PR side of things.
And they've got to be kicking themselves, because they actually had been kind of riding a bit of a wave.
Yes.
Better than expected November election results, some improving polling numbers, some signs of hope on the economy and inflation, and then you get this story after story that ended up kind of making Biden's team kind of look less like the staff of the West Wing and more like that of Veep.
Well, what's the car he's got? A Corvette?
Yeah. By the way, if you look under your seat, there may be a Corvette key.
Yes.
I remember, so they keep asking, to your point about the Veep. They're like, asking him questions. So what about the files? And he's like, yeah, they were in a garage locked with my Corvette. And they go, so the files were locked in the garage. And he's like, yes, with my Corvette. He kept saying it.
Yeah, the locked
It was
garage.
just like, oh, Selena, please, stop talking about your Corvette.
And I would be the staffer in the back cringing, saying, no, please stop. Just say no more.
Well, it's kind of like, the last administration when the staff had to always clean up stuff that the president was saying. This is a little bit different than that, but it is, like I said, it's going to be a problem. The only savings grace, I think, when it comes to the next election, we're in the beginning of 2023. It's not until the end of 2024. Will people forget? Well, I know some people won't want you to forget, and they're very good at keeping these kinds of things alive, especially Tuckums. But we'll see what happens.
Well, a couple of months have gone by since the November election. We've seen, I think, some of the dust settle. We've seen more dust kicked up. But you already know the headline results. The GOP took the House. The Democrats slightly expanded their Senate majority, or Senate control, really. They didn't have a majority before. And Gavin Newsom, of course, cruised to victory with another 200% of the vote, or whatever he got. Tim, to you, what were the most surprising things that happened in this election?
Well, I don't know that there was, I think everybody was kind of surprised by the margin in the House. But, to me, kind of looking at it, it's kind of a simple takeaway from that, right? And that's, if you nominate unelectable candidates, they will probably lose. And what do you know? Look what happened.
Most did.
Yeah.
Most did, but some didn't.
Yeah. And so that's why it's so important. And you saw with the Republican success in like New York or Florida, or even I would argue California was actually kind of a success story for Republicans in the House. If you nominate candidates that kind of reflect the district, both their priorities and kind of their profile, that they're, that person is one of us, those people win. I mean, people like Congresswoman Young Kim from Orange County, here in the Central Valley, Congressman David Valadao, who even voted for impeachment and was challenged by a Trump-backed challenger in the primary. He not only won the primary narrowly, but he won re-election by a pretty healthy margin. So I think that's the key takeaway for 2024 when you're looking at, all the calculus that's going into, Republicans theoretically will have a good opportunity, but the Senate map, there's a lot more Democrats seats than Republican seats up. But unless you nominate people who reflect the state and are electable and don't have, their last names aren't Santos, or DeVolder,
I'm like, you don't know his last name.
We don't know his last name. His last name is X. You're likely to repeat the same fate, and that goes both sides of the aisle. But yeah.
Melissa, who?
Well, I'm from Georgia, so this was crazy to watch. I grew up, Herschel Walker was just, just everything. It was like the one thing everyone could agree on is the awesomeness of Herschel Walker. So watching him
As a running back.
In football, but growing up and there's Jesus and Elvis and Herschel Walker, and then to see him in this race and saying these things and just it's another one of these, like every day it's just like there's another kid and another was so strange, and I think yes, you do want it. People might think it was freakishly close, but it was Herschel Walker. Like it would have been a lot less close, I think, if it hadn't been him. But I was thrilled to see my people split the ticket. Right? I mean, that's when you know that people are paying attention and that people aren't just being blind about like, oh, well, this party is blah and this party is blah. It's easy to be cynical. I know I am very cynical, but it's easy to just say, oh, Americans, they don't care. They just watch the video of the guy, say Social Security cuts and he pushes the lady off the cliff in a wheelchair and there, that's it. And that's what people care about. But people are more sophisticated, I think, than we give them credit for. And I think this election really showed that in a lot of places. I know I felt really good about some of these races and what people, the distinctions people made between candidates and parties in ways that I thought were better than what I know people like me were giving them credit for before Election Day.
I'm curious when you're thinking about Stacey Abrams, who kind of entered this one thinking she had a good chance, having come so close her first matchup with Brian Kemp. Is this the end of her political career, or?
It's the beginning of her TV career. That's what that is.
I mean, is that?
Potentially. I mean, I don't know how you raise money after this. I mean, there are already irregularities with the finances with this campaign. She raised a ton of money and spent a ton of money on things like big parties at Dave & Buster's, or there were some irregularities there with some of the ways that her campaign was spending money and basically ran out of money toward the end. And so people are already feeling skittish about giving her more money to run for another election. And so I don't know how much momentum she's got for another one. But she's a very popular person nationwide, and there's no reason why she couldn't, move on to a different kind of, political career in something that's not public office.
Bob, what was most notable in this election, do you think?
I think it was the number of bad candidates who won. Because we have quite a few. I mean, I was surprised at one point Lauren Boebert was behind in her race, and then she pulled it out. There are some of those people that you say they're just crazy. And anybody who was backed by the former president, not many of them won, but some of them did. But I'll tell you, I was stunned. What stunned me? Ohio. I thought Democrats had a good chance to pick that up against a guy that basically told women to stay in the kitchen and get pregnant, but he still won. So that was surprising to me. I wasn't as surprised about the House because anybody who was backed by the former president now really has a hard road to toe, because only the people that he would support are those who were going to deny the election, say the election was rigged. And I think the American people are getting tired of hearing that, which is why, that lady in Arizona, people are really tired of her.
You mean Governor-elect Kari Lake?
Oh, no, governor. No. She has the evidence that they're going to one day go in there and kick out the governor, and she's going to be the governor.
Oh, okay.
And she might be running for Senate in 2024, so
Really?
we might have heard the last
Which will be interesting with her and Kristen on the
three-way race for that one.
So we got a question this time, and we've gotten this question for when was 2016? It was so long ago.
7 years.
Pretty much every week, 2 weeks since then. Have we gotten past peak Trump then? In other words, has his total hold on the Republican Party been broken, or did McCarthy kind of give him a boost to them, because at the end, he specifically kind of did a praise Jesus to Trump after he won the speakership finally, and said he was the reason for the season.
I think we're past the peak with the Republican Party. The problem is Trump's voters don't care what party it is. They're going to support him no matter what. And that is a real problem for the Republican Party.
Okay.
I would say, too, if you look at today, if you looked at the polling right after the 2020 election of the Republicans, who would you support? I think Trump was at like 70-something% nationally. Today, it's like, I think in the low 40s or even high 30s.
43.
So, as we say, a year is an eternity in politics. We have 300 lifetimes before we can get to nominate who the Republican candidate is. So I think it depends what's the setup for 2024. If it's a repeat of 2016 and that dynamic, 100 people are running and you divide up the vote, he could win the nomination again. If it's more of a coalition, right, and you have one strong candidate or two strong candidates going against him, they could win. That could be enough votes to win. The Republican primary process, too, is different from the Democratic primary system. There's a lot of states that are winner-take-all. And the Democratic system is more kind of proportional, and there's a whole bunch of other ways that a lot of these states go about it. So in California, it's winner-take-all by congressional district. So if candidate X wins your congressional district, you get, I think it's 3 delegates. So it really depends what the whole makeup of the field is, before we can give the last rites.
Well, here in California, Republican Lanhee Chen, who, by the way, is a veteran panelist of Week to Week, not that we do endorsements here, but he made a run for the state controller's office, but he lost to Malia Cohen, 55.3 to 44.7%. Melissa, what do you make of Lanhee Chen's run? I mean, he got a lot of endorsements. People gave him a chance, but he still lost by big numbers. Do you think other Republicans will try to run in the mold of Lanhee Chen, or will they look at him and say, "That was another failed attempt by, we need to be more conservative. We need to be something different than a Stanford professor"?
Who wants a Stanford professor
I think it'd be great.
running money in the state? Outrageous. No, it just goes to show you. I mean, at some point, you'd probably need to think about a more moderate Democrat if you really want to win statewide in California. Like, if Lanhee Chen can't win, like, I don't know, who can? And so, because it's a top 2 primary, you might think more about backing somebody. If Malia Cohen was a problem, then back somebody who maybe is a declined state, or somebody who's not a Republican. I think that there's still such a brand problem, for lack of a better word, in California that it's just people who don't know look and go, oh, there you go. There's Malia Cohen's the name I recognize, right? She's been in politics quite a while, started here, Board of Supervisors, and now is already holding statewide office. So I think, it has been on the Board of Equalization. She's been out there. She's, prominent in the Democratic Party, within the Democratic Party. And so I think people recognized her name and saw a D next to it, and here we are. So, there may be better ways to do this because he did seem like a really, really qualified and good candidate. And yet, the fact that he's a Republican might be the problem going forward.
He probably could have won in Arizona and Georgia. I think no question. Because I think even in places like that, I think Democrats would have voted for him too.
Well, in Arizona, gal that I know who I worked with in the Schwarzenegger administration, Kim Yee, is the state treasurer of Arizona, and she won re-election, and she got the highest percentage of vote of any statewide candidate in Arizona this year. And she's in kind of the mold of a Lanhee Chen. So you're 100% right. So many other states, he would have won easily.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, thinking about this election, I mean, one of the most important things is for all my adult life, it's always been Ohio and Florida, the swing states, right? These are the ones. You go to. I was in Tampa once, right before a presidential election, and it was just insane how many ads there were and how assaulted these poor people in Florida were getting right before the presidential election. But that is not. That is not the case. I think Florida is pretty firmly Republican. Ohio, after this election especially, is probably pretty firmly Republican. And so now we're seeing more the swing states moving to places like Georgia, Arizona. And so the political ad money that Ohio and Florida are going to lose out on is going to put local television just right out of business. They're just going to be, they're counting on all those dollars coming in for those ads leading up to the presidential race. But I think that there's going to be a little less this time around. And those folks who are running all the TV stations in places like Georgia and Arizona are getting very excited about being a swing state.
How much is that because of gerrymandering, do you think, in those two states?
I don't know. I mean, gerrymandering hasn't, not gerrymandering. I was thinking of the census. The census didn't change things as much as you might have thought. But yeah, I mean, that could be a big part of it. But I mean, the election for governors, these are general elections. It's not, you know.
DeSantis and Kemp both won by such huge margins.
Yeah.
They pretty much, those are their states for the next 4 years.
But if you look at the House and the districts, the way that they have packed those districts, especially happens a lot in the South, where the Republicans who are in charge, they make it so that these seats are safe no matter what. The Democrats do the same thing in California, although not quite to the extent, I don't think.
Well, we've got our commission. We've got the independent commission.
Yeah, independent commission states, you have a much better chance of winning if you're a Democrat than if it's a Republican state.
Well, let's talk a bit before we move on to the next topic about some Democratic errors. It was interesting because literally the day I was rewatching an old episode of The West Wing, where, if you know the characters, Josh Lyman, White House senior advisor, gets into a fight with and insults this centrist Democratic senator, who then flips and becomes a Republican. Literally that day that I had watched it, I later hear the news about Kristen Sinema, a centrist Democratic senator who flips. She didn't become a Republican, she became an independent. I take it she'll be caucusing with the Democrats. But, it does kind of make you think back on, maybe it wasn't a good idea for those activists to scream at her and bring the camera in and harass her when she was trying to use the restroom and stuff like that. I mean, overreaching, that kind of stuff has issues, and it caused Josh Lyman a lot of heartache. Okay, well, another thing that I would say was a bit of overreaching. The Democrats' majority in the Senate could have been bigger. Republican Ron Johnson from Wisconsin was pretty widely considered to be the most vulnerable Republican senator, if not the most vulnerable senator at all in this entire election. He ended up winning fairly easily because there had been a broad swath of candidates who were running in the Democratic primary. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren came in and said, Mandela Barnes, you should be it. Mandela Barnes might be a fine person, I don't know him, but he definitely had some positions on crime and stuff that, obviously, again, I was talking before about if you're a campaign person and you can't take some element that would be seen negatively by your constituents about your opponent and make it a big thing, then you don't deserve to be in the business. Ron Johnson's people are in the business, and they took that and rode it to what turned out to be an easy victory. I don't know if I have a question there other than...
Yes.
Here's my thought. When I saw Mandela Barnes was running,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, you're in Wisconsin. You're a Democrat. You're gay.
Okay. Are you outing Mandela Barnes?
No, I think that's what I've heard. But okay, even if
We're
you're not,
making news.
yeah. But I'm thinking of
Tammy Baldwin.
thinking of somebody else. But at any rate, I saw some of his comments, and I didn't think he was trying to attack Ron Johnson, but I think he was attacking him on the wrong things. He didn't attack him on going to Moscow for the 4th of July and things like that I thought would have resonated with people. But he might have done great in the state legislature in Wisconsin, but that was it.
Well, as you pointed out, that is the lesson. Pick someone who reflects
Yeah.
who reflects the views of the state, and not someone who's too far out on the right or left. Yeah.
Right.
Well, in 2023, the long-anticipated year of generational change in Democratic leadership seems to have arrived. I mean, first and most notable, of course, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi gave up the leadership of her caucus. Of course, she couldn't be Speaker again. And I think she was, I don't know, I would have expected her to leave Congress after that, but she's staying in Congress. Do we know, has she said why, or why would you? I mean, obviously you want to be in Congress, but most people, once they've kind of reached the pinnacle of power, and she was very powerful, why would she want to stay in there and basically be just a member of the caucus?
She's still very powerful.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think she'd been working with Hakeem Jeffries for many years, sort of bringing him along and putting him forward. And not that he doesn't deserve it or hasn't earned it, but I just mean like years ago, it seemed like she and he were going places, and she would make sure he had speaking engagements, and was really putting him forth as her successor. I mean, it was very clear who this was going to be. But so you literally pass the minority party gavel over to him, but hang around to make sure things go pretty smoothly. I mean, I think he would still benefit from having her there, and she still has a lot of power, knows where all the bodies are buried, and we'll keep electing her as long as she wants to go. So why come back here and hang out?
In the UK, it's not an unusual thing to have a former prime minister hang around for, like Ted Heath, who was the prime minister in the 1970s. I think he stayed another 20 years in Parliament after he was out of office. Theresa May is still a member of Parliament. Boris Johnson, well, I'm sure he'll go make money before too long, but he's still a member of Parliament. So, I mean, it's not an unusual thing over there. Can I just say on Speaker Pelosi, one thing that I think is an incredible accomplishment is to be the leader of your party for 20 years. People don't understand, if you haven't been in it, how hard that is, not only to get the leadership, but to stay in the leadership for so long. And especially most of that time you're the minority leader. And that is the most thankless job in politics, to be the minority leader. Everybody is upset, and usually they're mad at you. So to kind of ride that wave for 20 years, that's a feat that's not going to be paralleled anytime soon.
Y'all should check out the documentary that her daughter did. It's quite good. It was good.
Bob, Dianne Feinstein, let's raise that issue.
Love Dianne Feinstein. I've been at KCBS 42 years, and she was always in the news. She was always part of it. But I think it's time. I really do. Because I think after a while, you don't really have to be the sharpest tack in the room, but you have to be at least, you have to be there. And I question whether somebody who's been in there that long can still perform the way that you would want your people to perform. Now, I realize a lot of this is staff-driven, but, I would not be at all surprised if she decides not to run. And people are already lining up, I heard Adam Schiff this afternoon on cable. He was asked the question point blank, and well, I'm really focusing on the storms and everything else. But after that, then we'll see what happens. So he's running. Katie Porter's running.
Oh, yeah.
That denial is clear proof.
Yes.
Yeah. Barbara Lee has mentioned interest. Do you think she'll do it? She'll throw her head in?
I don't know. I think Barbara is happy where she is and what she's doing. Would she have liked to have been the speaker? Of course. But, going into the Senate, that's a whole different ballgame, and I just don't know.
Well, it's hard to make the case that that Dianne Feinstein's too old, but Barbara Lee's not. Let's face it. Like they're very similar in terms of their generation, and I think you have just such a bottleneck of people. Everyone is going to run, by the way. If you're like Katie Porter, she's the first of like 200. The person making your coffee at Starbucks, they're going to run. The principal at your kid's school, they're going to run. Everybody's been waiting for this moment. And it's not even that hard because we have a top two primary. It's not even that hard. You need about $4,000 and about 100 signatures. So everybody starts saving up because The ballot is going to be 75 pages long. And remember, not everybody's even running to run for the seat, right? People run for a lot of reasons. They run because maybe they want to run for Nancy Pelosi's seat later, or because they want to run for governor after Gavin Newsom is out of office. And so, you run for the seat so you can collect money and get your name out there. Even Dianne Feinstein ran for governor before she was elected for Senate. So, you put your name out there, you don't win, but people kind of get a sense of who you are, that you run successfully. So there's a lot of reasons, including pent-up demand, but also people interested in getting themselves out there and being more well-known for other offices, why people are going to run. So Katie Porter is the first of, I think, many who are going to be declaring. And it's not uncommon that in a race like this, a statewide race, that people start declaring early, especially if you're more progressive or populist. So either on the left if you're more progressive, on the right if you're more populist, because you're going to need those $5 and $10 donations. And so you need as much time as you can to collect them. And so it's not like you can just host a $100,000 a plate dinner. Not all candidates can do that. So the ones that maybe have a harder time with that, declare early. And so you're going to see more people who are less in the mainstream of the party declaring quickly, so they can have the runway to gather up all the small donations that they need and to travel and do all that stuff. So she's not the first. She won't be the last. And you're going to see more people who are on the left declare before you're going to see more folks whose names maybe you recognize and as mainstream Democrats.
Well, I'm announcing tonight I'm not going to run for U.S. Senate next year. But one thing that I think people aren't really focusing on for this, I think the primary is next March. So that's almost a year away. So if you're a Katie Porter, you can't wait for Dianne Feinstein to say what she's going to do. You've got to go. And it kind of is the same thing I was talking about earlier, where kind of an AOC or a Matt Gaetz isn't, the leadership doesn't have as much a hold on them because they have their own independent fundraising base. So does she. She raised $20 million for her House race. She has people from across the country who send $5 and $10 to her campaign. And she had to deplete most of her war chest for a very tough re-election last year. So she had to go and do it. I'm interested to see, as this race shakes out, there are a lot of people, and there's a lot of voids in the race as we're talking about it so far. So there's all of these people are kind of the front runners so far, but there's no prominent Latino Democrat that I've heard of that is being talked about to run. That's a huge amount of votes in the primary. The other thing is, will there be a Republican with some kind of name, Lanhee Chen or whoever, that runs? Because this race could be over next March. We're kind of used to it's a Democrat versus a Democrat in the general election. And I think the data has kind of shown, like if you don't have a Republican in the general election, Republicans kind of sit it out or don't really know what to do. It's hard to predict how they will vote. Well, if you get one kind of named Republican, that's going to be enough votes to get into the top two, in a huge splintered Democratic field. So this could be a wild. Well, the station general managers in Florida might be crying. The station general managers in California are going to be very happy. Bob, you should ask for a raise from KCBS. They're going to make a lot of money over the next year.
Yeah, my boss at CBS would always complain because he'd see, what's going on in other states. He'd be like, we never, because, it's Pelosi, it's Feinstein, it's Boxer for so long. He's just like, we never get any of that ad money. So yeah, they're very excited.
Well, we've only got a few minutes, and we want to get to our news quiz. I did want to quickly touch on the storms we've been having. We've storms, floods, backed up drains, wind, George Santos.
Trees.
So briefly, let's talk about how well we weathered the weather. Bob, you've been reporting on this. How do you think the state has done? Both, has our leadership done as well as they could? Did they fail? Are there things we should be doing differently?
Well, I know here in San Francisco, I remember New Year's Eve, they got almost 5.5 inches of rain. And I have pictures of people at 15th and Folsom on their surfboards in the floodwater, which is not clean. But I remember the news conference either the day after or the same day in which there are 25,000 storm drains in San Francisco. And I asked, who was it, the former city attorney who's now running PUC, Dennis Herrera, do you have enough people to clean all these drains? Because that was a problem. I don't know if in your neighborhood, all these drains are bubbling up. And in San Francisco, that's a real problem. And that's what caused most of the flooding. And he said they do. I don't think they do. So I think that's that's something that's going to have to come. They're going to have to be a come to Jesus moment on that in San Francisco for the infrastructure. But I've been covering storms, since I've been out on the streets since 1989, and I've never seen a storm. In my house, I live, in the East County. It rained for like a couple of days and rained hard. So I know the ground loves it, the trees love it, but I'm wondering how many of these other apartment buildings, like I covered in Oakland, where the tree fell over on the apartment building, went through the roof of this lady's apartment, and she lost everything. She had to get out. It's red tagged now. So that's a big problem throughout the state. I know the president today was in Capitola. We'll see. I mean, we're getting all the emergency aid and all that, but if you lost your place and you don't have a place to live, that's a problem. And I was talking to somebody else whose place was flooded out, and I said, well, do you have flood insurance? Well, no. Who thinks about getting flood insurance in San Francisco? That's going to be another big problem.
I have a colleague who was telling me he lives down on the peninsula, and he said, yeah, their flood insurance just went up dramatically. Well, on that note, let us get to the news quiz. If we could have the lights turned up a bit so we can see our audience. We've been doing this for 11 years. I think you basically know how we do it. I'm going to read some questions. Fran is going to walk around with a bag of chocolate.
Yay, Fran.
Thank you, Fran. Fran, you're the most popular person in the room right now. I'll ask a question. If you think you know the answer, raise your hand. Please don't just shout it out. That would be sad. And if you do win, then maybe let other people win on the other questions. So the first question is, an advisor to Ukrainian President Zelensky submitted his resignation after he suggested what about a rocket attack on an apartment building it was in Dnipro. Did anyone see this story? No hands. Am I missing anyone? Okay. He had suggested that it might have been a Ukrainian misfire. Sorry.
No.
Following criticism about a video she made at a New Year's celebration, the defense minister of what country resigned this weekend? Way in the back there. That is correct.
What is this video?
She was actually making, I think, like normal, serious political comments about the sad situation in Ukraine, but in the background was all this celebration of New Year's. It was basically a very tone-deaf thing.
That's nothing. In America, we do way worse stuff.
Speaking of way worse, who is Solomon Pena?
Is he the new shortstop?
No. Give you a hint, he's in New Mexico.
Over there,
Sorry?
to the right.
Oh, okay. Well, first one is over there, sir.
The unsuccessful candidate in New Mexico who's been in charge with ranging for four people to be shot or
Right. He hired people to go and shoot at the homes of local Democratic leaders because he declared his race had been stolen. Okay, very good. Reacting to investor pressure, the Jack in the Box restaurant chain pledged more humane treatment for what?
Employees.
Unfortunately, no.
It's pigs.
This is sorry.
Pigs, right?
You don't get chocolate.
I know, but no, they don't.
Okay.
I
yes,
waited.
It's pigs. In their supply chain, they're vowing to only source pork from pigs raised in group pens. Yes, that's more important to them than the employees.
With Wi-Fi.
Okay. Under a brand new law, the San Francisco Public Defender's Office said 1,300 people could have what happen to them? Sorry? No, but you're kind of thinking along the right lines. Anyone? Way in the back.
Sentences expunged?
Yes, they would have their records cleared under a new law. Okay, next. Speaking of laws, a proposed law in the state of Wyoming would ban the sale of what right here in the front?
EVs.
Electrical vehicles. That is correct. It gets better. The bill also mandates that a copy of the bill would be sent to Gavin Newsom. In what is probably unintentional drollery, SF Gate writes, quote, "It's uncommon for state legislatures to request that a copy of a measure be sent to the executive of a different state, especially when the two states are roughly 1,150 miles apart." Okay.
Is that an issue bill? Is that
Very
that was
well
a
could
message,
be.
so-
Yeah, it's a message.
message?
That was a
the
message from a
messaging
legislature in the majority.
Yes.
Okay. Microsoft announced yesterday it was laying off how many? Sir, in the stripe. You're correct, though yeah. Well, to the lady in the second row, we'll try you again next, okay? Hey, guess what? Amazon announced it was going to lay off how many people? 8,000. 41. In the striped shirt, sir, give me a guess.
10,000.
You're correct.
Give him his chocolate.
10,000 apparently is a magical number to lay off. So if you are a tech CEO, just, follow the leaders. This week, what southern governor proposed a permanent ban on COVID mandates? Ma'am. DeSantis of Florida, that is correct. That's number 6. Who was the French nun's sister Andre? I think your hand was first way over here. Technically not the oldest living person anymore, but you're correct.
118.
Her birth name was Lucille Randon. Sure, it's pronounced differently in French. And she was the world's oldest person. She passed away at the age of 118. I don't know. And I think I saw she had COVID last year and survived that, but hey.
but not Santos.
Meryl Streep has joined the star-studded cast of what popular TV show on Hulu? Way over there. You are correct. Only Murders in the Building. Hey, let's stay with Hollywood. Former star of Boy Meets World, Ben Savage, is considering a new job. Whose job does he want to take? I'll give you a hint. The person's name was mentioned on this show. In the back there.
Adam Schiff.
That's correct. He's going to run in the Democratic Party against Adam Schiff. And Fran, how many more bags do we have in there? 2? Okay. I can never pronounce this name, so I'm going to have you folks do it, or someone who raises their hand. The Prime Minister of New Zealand announced she would resign her office. What is her name? Way in the back.
You already won.
Oh, did you? I'm sorry. You already won? Yeah, I did. I'm sorry. Yeah. But you did pronounce the name correctly. Okay, we'll go to another one. Twitter is having a fire sale of items at its San Francisco offices, and in an auction, the highest selling item was a floor statue of the Twitter bird. What price did that go for? Right along there. $100,000. Okay, so we have one more. Okay, that one's not any good. In a report, the U.S. Supreme Court said it could not find whom?
You could have, what?
They couldn't find someone. Who?
Oh.
Sir?
Person who leaked the
Dobbs decision.
Yep,
case that reversed Roe versus Wade.
correct. The person who leaked the draft Dobbs decision earlier this year. Thank you, folks. So good to have a nice big crowd here again. I want to thank our excellent panel today, Melissa Kane, Bob Butler, and Tim Anaya. For a great conversation. Thanks all of you. Thanks everyone watching and listening online. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, and we'll see you again.
Go Niners.